Mr. Jeffrey,
Yes.
I am struggling a little bit here with trying to, oh, never mind. I was going through the calendar and that didn't seem to work to get to the meeting
The
site,
calendar
but
link did not?
I did find the link looking under the Board of Managers meeting thing. So I just wanted to make sure I had whatever documents.
Yep. So up there should be your original draft edits, the draft that the managers or that the committees put forward, and then I have distributed yours. In fact, I will send to Dylan your latest comments and he can put those up right now.
Well, we're at 7 o'clock.
7 p.m.
Like to call the April Board of Managers Workshop to order. And as declared by the president, this meeting's to be held in person and public, recognizing a manager may, based on the health advice from a healthcare professional, have a legitimate reason for not attending the meeting in a public place in person, such as COVID exposure or infection, or in such circumstances may participate in the meeting remotely. So first we'll have a call of the members who are here. Mr. Smith.
Roll call. Manager Crafton.
Present.
Manager Duval.
Present.
Manager Cook.
Present.
Manager Ziegler.
Present.
President Pedersen.
Present.
All managers present.
Thank you. As you can see from our agenda, we really only have one item on the agenda this evening, which is to walk through the governance manual comments and revisions. It's a pretty broad document that's fairly long, so I am going to attempt to try to have us conclude the meeting by 8:30 or 9 o'clock because we're really working on the first 37 pages of the document. And I'm not looking to have all of these changes voted on this evening because we only have a certain part of the manual that we'll be looking through today. I thought that what we might want to do is to have Mr. Jeffrey talk a little bit about the process that's happened until we've gotten to this meeting, and then perhaps have Mr. Smith guide us through the substantive changes in those first 37 pages.
Madam President,
Yes,
should we approve the agenda?
yes, please.
I will move that.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. May we have a roll call, please?
Manager Crafton.
Yes.
Manager Duval.
Yes.
Manager Cook.
Yes.
Manager Ziegler.
Yes.
President Pedersen.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jeffrey.
President Pedersen, managers, thank you. As you noted, we have the one item on the agenda tonight, that is the governance manual. We will be going through everything up to the financial policies. We are going to bring the financial policies back to further review to both the Audit and Finance and Governance Committee. If you remember, been a while, in the summer of 22, the board moved to revise the governance manual, sent it over to the governance committee for review. And in August, at the August 5th meeting in 2022, the governance committee began the process. And the first thing they did was solicit comments from any CAC members or managers that might want to present on it. We received comments from Manager Cook and from CAC member Sharon McCotter. Over the next 8 meetings after the February meeting, the last meeting being February 9th of 24, the governance committee walked through the comments that were made, either accepted with edits, or rejected the comments, and put together the document that is before you tonight that was presented with the original packet submittal that you received on Friday of on Monday of this week. In addition to that, Manager Cook has submitted additional comments for review by the managers. Those were submitted yesterday, and you should all have received a copy for them. in front of you, the version of the governance manual that you have is the one that was recommended by the committees. We will share on the screen the governance comments made by Manager Cook. And with that, I'll answer any questions. Otherwise, I would be happy to turn it over to Mr. Smith for discussion.
Excuse me, Madam President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
So I have a few questions and comments, perhaps in a discussion of maybe how we proceed on this. Well, first of all, this being a rather lengthy document, having, although I did my best to make comments on the latest draft, 3 days I don't think is really sufficient time to devote to review the document. I think that's especially true in light of the timeline that Administrator Jeffrey pointed out. I'll point out that, we worked on this, and when I was on the committee, worked on this, and I believe we were to the point of submitting this to the board for discussion, but I was not reappointed to the committee. I just want to point out that since then, it has been some 15 months during which the current committee, as I understand it, has been looking to review this. So my point is, I would hope tonight is really just a question of Mr. Smith walking through it, and that we end up with more adequate time to review these comments. I mean, I didn't have time or the process to be able to go back to, my last original comments. I tried to do my best to, review those and incorporate them, but 3 days was working just isn't, a sufficient amount of time. So I think our process to do this, I'd like that to be, reviewed. And then I'm glad that, Administrator Jeffrey pointed out, I guess, what the committee has done. What I'd like to know is, has everybody else had an adequate time to review the proposed changes? And whether or not anybody else has submitted any comments on the document.
I have by choice read through everything. I have had adequate time. As they said, the governance committee worked on this for 8 meetings before they came and got comments from you and Ms. McCotter before the revision that's before us. Does anybody else, any other manager? have a comment,
Excuse me,
or-
I just asked, matter of procedure. I just asked the question. I didn't yield the floor. So I'd like to continue. As part of this, I have asked for, along the way, I've asked for versions of the documents. To my recollection, I was not provided with those versions, as they went through. One thing I also think it's important to note for the record that at least when we had COVID, we had recorded meetings so we could listen to and hear discussions. But a point whereas my understanding there wasn't any recordings made. If I'm wrong, I'd like to get those recordings. So I quite frankly don't see how anyone can review and contemplate the current changes and be able to make a decision. And I know we're not going to be making any decisions on these, but what I'd like to know is basically what the procedure is going to go forward after tonight. And then I'd like to hear from Mr. Smith.
Are you yielding the floor, Manager Cook?
I yield the floor.
Thank you.
President Pedersen, managers, again, tonight we just want to walk through the revisions and the comments made. We do have other portions of this governance manual yet to be reviewed by the Audit and Finance Committee and the Governance Committee. I do not see this coming back to the board at the next meeting, or maybe even not the June meeting for approval. So I still see there being plenty of time yet for managers to be able to review the document.
Thank you. So, Mr. Smith, may I ask you to take over here?
Okay. Managers, the way I would suggest we proceed tonight with a goal of providing the board members an opportunity to understand the committee's recommended changes, and then comments that Manager Cook has offered more recently that raise substantive issues. I think there, as you go through the document, there are a variety of what I would consider stylistic references or grammar choices. And my suggestion is that we not take time tonight of the board's time to work through that. And ultimately, you'll have hopefully a clean, consistent document that comes before you at the time of adoption. So the first section of the governance manual is the introduction. And the substantive issue really is raised as to the nature of the changes that and the process for amending the governance manual. And the committee recommended that notice of any proposed amendment be contained in the notice of the meeting at which the proposed amendment is to be considered, with instructions or links to obtain a copy of the proposed amendment. And Manager Cook has offered additional edits or in language to address that point, including specific instructions in the notice, and that inclusion of the proposed amendment in the agenda to the meeting alone does not satisfy the requirement. And then the last paragraph of the introduction, the committee added that managers, district staff, and contractors are expected to conduct district business in accordance with the manual and to alert the board to improvements and additions needed. And Manager Cook has added that manager, staff, contractors, and other constituents of the district are encouraged to alert the governance committee and the board to the manual. So a couple of differences there. So let me pause there and see if you have any questions or further comment on that section.
Any comments? Hearing none, we could proceed. Thank you.
I have a process question for you all, which is, I think it'd be helpful for you to give us direction on these changes that I'm flagging so that we know when we come back to you, we have a version that we think is consistent with at least a majority of the board's thinking. So I'm wondering if you, beyond the committee's changes, if any of Manager Cook's changes you would like to give direction on.
So first, I would like to say that unless they're substantive, I mean, like just a change in wording that really doesn't change the meaning of it, I feel like those things you and Administrator Jeffrey can figure out on your own without us providing direction for those simple changes. I think the more substantive changes, which are the ones you're bringing to us, if anybody has a comment on one of them, whether or not we should be staying with the revision that was given by the governance committee, or you see a change for one of the options that Manager Cook has given us, we of course want to hear that. So
maybe it'd be appropriate to hear from Manager Cook first.
Sure.
His thoughts, and then
Manager Cook.
Well, again, I will do my best to address these, given the limited amount of time to do this as I put these together. You know, the purpose here, in my opinion, is just to make it as inclusive for other, you know, to make changes. I don't know if that's really substantive, but I think the broader audience, you know, the better for obtaining, you know, people's comments, and as far as I just need to read the language here again. Now, what you're looking at, does that include my language, or is that just the committee's draft? Because
Madam President. Manager
Yes.
Cook, I was referring to, also to your suggested language, especially if maybe you would explain more about inclusion of the proposed amendment in the agenda to the meeting alone does not satisfy this requirement. Maybe if you could describe what you were thinking there.
well, what I think there is at the minimum, which is somewhat addressed, is to make sure that there actually be a reference, to the document and some minor summary of what changes are going to be addressed, so that we just don't. I'll be quite frank. I am, and the reason this came to my mind is that I thought it was inappropriate the way some of our agendas had described or would describe actions that we are going to contemplate, especially with respect to Spring Valley, et cetera. And my point here is that I want to make sure that people are well aware of the actual topic that we're going to be discussing. That is, specifically amendments to the governance manual, and to make sure that given that we are doing hybrids for the public, that we have links to the appropriate documents, like Administrator Jeffrey has done, for the notice, of this meeting substantially. So that's where I was coming from, and I started drafting that before Administrator Jeffrey's agenda had included those two documents. So think that it is. I just want to make it clear we're going to be straightforward, making sure the public knows what we're going to be contemplating and acting on. So I don't want to belabor the point, but that was the reason I addressed that part.
President Pedersen, managers, just for clarity, Manager Cook, you just want to make sure that the actual item that is to be acted on, if in this case it's the governance manual, that is available to the public or anyone else for their review.
Well, the two things. One, it's adequately described as what we're going to be addressing. It says, review or change of the governance manual. No, and I'm just, don't take this wrong, but no obfuscation of what we're doing, no hiding the ball type of a thing. And I'm not alleging that we did in this situation, but I think it's very clear that managers probably know, but the public knows exactly what we're going to be discussing, because I think in particular the governance manual, whatever it ends up consisting of, it's important that the public know we're going to be addressing it. And it's very important, I think, that as many members of the public have an opportunity to view the document. And according to our process, once we've arrived at it, there's going to be, a 30-day, or there should be a 30-day comment period, so that people can look at it and submit their changes. So that's what I was addressing, those two things.
Do you have a comment, Manager DeBonne?
Madam President?
Yes.
So I'm wondering if either Mr. Smith or Mr. Terry, Mr. Jeffrey, could just comment on the backdrop for what we're doing overall regard to this. Is this like housekeeping? Are we looking at, is there some major thing that's driving the change? Maybe the backdrop of this review process, I guess.
President
Either one of
Pedersen,
you?
yeah, President Pedersen, managers. I think what Manager Cook is asking for to be specifically spelled out the things that we are supposed to be doing in this case. So I'm not, unless Mr. Smith has a different take on it, I'm not seeing anything that's asking us to do something that we're not already required to do.
But I was referring to as just a broader statement of something about the process that we're looking at the whole manual. Why are we doing that now? Why didn't it take place 2 years ago when it was started? So it's kind of carried on, but what is the broader perspective of what we're doing right now? Is it by statute that we're reviewing it every year, every 2 years? Is it something that's come up that's triggered a relook?
President Pedersen, managers, and Mr. Smith can speak more to any statutory requirements. Our governance manual itself does say that we will annually review the governance manual. I think when we discussed in the summer of 22, it was understood that there were things that needed to change, if nothing else, for the fact that we had COVID and a number of things had changed throughout just the way business was operated. So I believe the managers at that time thought it was the right time to address the overall governance manual. As to any statutory obligations, again, I'll let Mr. Smith speak to that.
Mr. Smith.
Madam Chair, I don't know if Manager Duvall's done, but when he's done, I just have a slight comment add on to that.
You're done.
Did you have any comments, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Smith would like to respond.
Oh.
Mr. Smith.
Well, I think Mr. Jeffrey has summarized the regular process of reviewing, and it's been some time to 2020 since the last governance
Okay.
manual was adopted. So it's good practice just to review these policies, both so that we're all familiar with them, but also improve them
Good.
when we can. And then occasionally there are legislative changes, and some of these policy statements are based on statute. So if the statute changes, then it makes sense to revise it.
Thank you.
Manager Cook, you had a comment?
Yes, we started it, into this, process of doing this. One of my goals was to basically implement the anti-Mack truck principle, which is to be as reasonably specific as to process, so that if something happens to people and we don't have people left who are familiar with the operations, they at least have a place to start. And we were lucky to have Administrator Jeffrey available when former Administrator Blesser left. But those are that's how I was trained. I mean, I was in the military. You're trained to have processes and procedures that you can fall back on if something, would happen. Heavens forbid that, that could happen. And, I know a number of us, have some years here, and we have Mr. Smith, but, I think Mr. Smith indicated one time he may want to retire. And so that was my impetus of going through a lot of this, just to say, okay, is this how we're going to be doing things? And then just spell it out. That doesn't mean we can't change it on that basis. But I thought if we're going to it, a better practice is to leave a reasonably detailed policy for the people that follow us on that basis.
Thank you. So I guess at this point, we need to talk about whether or not we agree that the change that Manager Cook is recommending needs to be done. And I think that this is our normal process, that we're already doing that. I don't see the necessity of putting more detail to it, but you all might disagree with me or not. So,
I'm very comfortable with what's here,
okay,
Yes.
what the committee
So-
recommended. So
okay.
I think it's well thought out, and there were good clarifications.
I'm also very comfortable with the wording as it was recommended
Okay.
by the committee, which I was on.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we have 4 of us that agree that it should be left as it is.
Well,
All right.
Madam President,
Yes, Manager Cook.
that may be 4. And with all due respect, I've been doing this for well over 45 years, with entities of all sizes. And it is a best practice to have reasonably more detail and process in any one of these manuals. And I don't know in detail all the rest of your experiences, but I know the experience that I've had, both public sector and the private sector. And again, I think we should be being as reasonably specific as possible going forward, thinking about those who will follow in our footsteps. So I recommend we make that we consider those changes, and because I don't believe most of those are substantive in any way, shape, or form.
Do you yield the floor, Manager Cook?
I yield.
Thank you.
Managers, the next item would be under the general governance policies and the section 1 contracting provision. The governance committee recommends adding paragraph E, that all contracts with the district shall provide that the district should have not less than 45 days from receipt of an invoice for payment without interest or penalty. And that seems to be a change that all managers support. The next section is per diems. And the committee recommended several changes to the per diem section that a manager may receive 1 per diem for preparation for each meeting of the Board of Managers, but no per diem shall be provided for preparation to attend a workshop. Let's see. That was the only substantive change the committee recommended as to per diems. Manager Cook has recommended adjusting that language. So as I understand it, per diem could be available for preparation of each meeting, regardless of whether or not it's a workshop. And it wouldn't be necessarily restricted to 1 per diem for preparation of a meeting, as I understand the language. And then some additional language about the claim form, which is not really substantive. But the question is, I think substantive question is, committee's recommendation is more limiting as to per diems. Manager Cook's recommendation, her suggestion is broader.
Madam President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
First of all, I have to say that I have some grave concerns whether or not this compensation per diem policy that we have complies with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And in fact, I believe it does not. And certainly not under, I believe, the, I guess I would say, policy that has recently been adopted by the Biden administration. I think it's important that I think if anybody's doing their job, in looking at a item on a workshop, they should be spending time doing so, and they should have the opportunity to claim a day spent reviewing those materials that are going to be addressed at the workshop. It seemed to me we would not want managers to be going into a meeting, ill prepared. And my understanding of Fair Labor Standards Act, you do work, you get paid, whether it's authorized or not. The law is the law. And you can't say, well, I didn't authorize that, you don't get paid. That, my understanding is that is not the law. The law is you must be paid if you do the work. And it's pretty clear. But anyhow, you can talk that over with I would suggest you talk that over with your labor and employment lawyers. But if we're doing, having these workshops and doing substantive work in reviewing those, I think we should, no different than any other meeting, we should have the opportunity to be paid for preparation for that meeting. So that's number one. And changes that I suggested formatting wise was just to be able to make it clear rather than jump everything into one condensed paragraph, to break them out, to make it clear what do you get, what can you get a a per diem for what you're for sure entitled to, a per diem for those items, which I think is pretty consistent with what we have done in the past.
President Patterson.
Are you done, Manager Cook?
Yes, I
President
am. Thank you.
Thank you.
President Pedersen, managers, one thing that I would like to bring up, the Minnesota Watersheds did their annual survey, and in that survey, one of the things that some of the districts have done to address what Manager Cook is getting at is they have a per diem for the meeting, and then they have an hourly rate for outside obligations or preparations, et cetera. That might be one thing the board could consider if they wanted to look at a way to compensate for other things. I am concerned though, it's already tenuous or contentious to review per diems and to decide what is and is not allowed under this. So I, whatever the board decides, I would like it to be crystal clear.
Any comments from the governance committee?
Yes.
Madam
So,
Pres- Oh, go ahead.
so I do work reviewing all the invoices and credit cards and stuff and against the spreadsheet that Dylan and whoever is putting together. And then I do a review once I get the internal report. But I just feel, I mean, per diem used to be $75 and now we're up to 125. So I combine all of that for one per diem at this point, because I don't think that, I mean, I'm here because I want to serve in that capacity, and I'm not here to be collecting per diem. So, I don't think it's necessary really go to hourly unless you think that's necessary, but I'm just trying to restrict what I charge because I think it's generous already. So, I don't necessarily ask for per diem even for preparation. So,
Thank you, Manager Crafton.
Madam President.
Yes.
So I guess the perspective that I have come to this, and I'm still having difficulty trying to figure out what it is. I think it fundamentally gets down to the role of a manager, board manager versus staff. And I've always interpreted the role of the managers to be that of broad oversight of what's going on in the district, overseeing the work and recognizing that everybody has different definition of what level of detail you get involved with. But we hire expert consultants that look over our shoulders on everything we do. We have a very talented, skilled staff. And at least from my perspective, it doesn't feel like it's the role of a manager to be burrowing down into as much detail as we do often. And so anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a definition that I have in my mind. It's almost like a board of directors of sorts. They're looking at the overall operation of what's going on. They're not looking at Administrator Jeffrey's credit card account for the specific month. We have a broad perspective of what's going on. We're there to steer. We're not there to manage every detail of what's going on. So I see it, I think I see it differently than maybe others. I'm not sure.
Thank you,
I hear
Manager Duvall. Manager Ziegler.
Madam President, yes, I am in agreement with the recommendation by the committee. I believe that per diems are appropriate as they are, and the amount of the per diem is set by state law, I believe. And I don't think an hourly rate for a board member is appropriate. You know, an hourly rate is appropriate for a contractor, you know, that's working as required, and they track their time and that type of stuff. And I don't think that that's appropriate for a board member.
And I would concur with the discussion with the managers that are here in person. I don't really look at this as being a job where I'm going to be making a ton of money. I'm looking at this more of a community service. And I feel like what I'm getting is so much more generous than it was when I first started, that I feel incredibly lucky. I'm getting what I'm getting. So I would prefer my extra dollars to go towards projects that we are actually doing good things out in the community.
Madam President,
Yes.
I guess, so what I do, I mean, so as the treasurer, I see what I'm doing as our internal control, my part of that process. And that's the only reason I would ask for a per diem for that. But I totally agree with what you just said.
Madam
Okay.
President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
Well, I think I need to respond to, what you managers have stated. First of all, there is an old adage, you get what you pay for. Secondly, a review of the statute, specifically states the managers are in charge. It's not a board of directors on that basis. Whether staff is hired or engineers or whatever are totally optional. And again, I'm not here to offend anybody, but nobody that I know of on the staff has the tenure in these positions to be able to do something without anybody giving it a second thought. And finally, I would recommend everybody to go and, read the oath of office that, we take. And finally, I guess one other thing is, if an individual manager doesn't want to be paid, doesn't want to pay attention, that's fine. That's their option. Well, quite frankly, that shouldn't be applied to everybody. And quite frankly, I think the law says otherwise. And I do think the idea of some compensation on an hourly basis could be something that would be workable. And I have to say, this has come up in other watersheds. So, I'm not alone on this issue. And the question is how do we do it? And finally, the statute says is the maximum amount we can get paid in any day is the $125. Okay. It doesn't say how we get paid. Doesn't say whether it's hourly or a per diem amount or anything like that. All it says is the maximum we can be paid for any day is $125. So I think we've been operating, or a lot of people operate under the misconception that this somehow is a per diem process. We've made it one, but that's not what the statute says. That is not what the statute says, in my opinion. And so I think we have some flexibility, basically buffered on the downside, I believe, by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and on the upside by the statute that limits, payments on a per day cannot exceed $125, which you'll never exceed that under the federal hourly wage, no matter how many hours you work in a day. So I think it's a mistake. And so what I wanted to know is that, based upon, trying to show me where our per diem language says that anybody is supposed to get paid for anything other than attending meetings or preparation for a meeting, etc. And if it doesn't say that, then we have been violating our own policy and procedure, and we should be making an appropriate adjustment then. And perhaps we have I think they call them qui-tam claims for payments and that not been duly authorized or in violation of our very own rules. So I think this is something that I would submit these issues should go back to the governance committee for consideration. And also when you're having to do with pay, obviously the audit and finance committee, should be involved. But, we don't have slavery in the United States anymore, but you're also not required to take money if you don't want it. But you're not allowed not to pay for work, at least under my understanding of the law. But that's different for a nonprofit, not a government agency on that basis. So my recommendation is to have the governance committee go look at this and get the advice of council and the audit finance committee, and then come back with their view, whether it's changed or not.
Do you yield the floor, Manager Cook?
One moment, please. I do.
Mr. Smith, would you like to comment at all? I think you've heard the opinion of the four of us that are here and Manager Cook.
Managers, I think I have sufficient direction. I would say that it is within the board's legal authority to define necessary duties of the managers. So the next issue is the records and management and retention section, the general governance policies. I don't think there's a very significant substantive difference between the language the committee recommended. Manager Cook has recommended additional language, but I think it is all consistent. And so it's just a question of whether it's redundant or superfluous from what is already stated. But I frankly, I don't think it's worth a lot of the board's time to wade through that if
Great.
you're all ready to move on.
Great.
There's similarly some language Manager Cook has offered about the Journal of Votes, which is a older issue, I think. And I think the general intention from the committee was to make sure that the website provide all the meeting materials, including materials, added along the way to a meeting or at the meeting. And so I think all of that is consistent, just a question of efficiency of language.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I heard.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. I just had a brief comment on your comment that I actually used the wrong words. So you go ahead and let me know when you want me to.
I was going to go to the next Roman numeral 5 manager's authority having to do with request for information next.
If I could just comment on that, and I know I mentioned Journal of Votes, and I know that law's been changed, but I recommend what we do, which I have a feeling we may do it, but not maybe very formally, is to have a journal that is a folder, or if we were doing it physically, a binder with all the signed resolutions in it, and not, I mean. Don't have to have a Journal of Votes per se, but I think that since I think we've done a pretty good job of converting over and making sure that we have, written resolutions for most of our material items, and that we incorporate those into a certificate signed by the secretary, which I think is a good practice. That we state, okay, our process is going to be, we do these, and then we're going to keep them together in some type. I don't care what you call it, some type of, you can call it a journal, you can call it a folder, a file, or whatever it is. But that was the point I tried to make. I just happened to use votes as opposed to the fact that we be a journal of minutes, I guess, but maybe more importantly, a journal of our resolutions, so we can go find them, because I don't know. I think it's very difficult, and certainly don't want to go plowing through a bunch of minutes, which I think would be very efficient. So I think it'd be very efficient if we had a one folder, call it what do you want to call it, a journal of resolutions, just as a matter of document or organization, and it would allow us to answer data requests or people who need information, I think, a lot quicker and more efficiently, which part of this is I based it on, I believe it's a Bowser rule about maintaining efficient records. So, and actually, I think the statute also says we're obligated to maintain efficient records, and so I think this would be part of that process. So I yield.
Thank you, Manager Cook.
President Pedersen,
Yes.
managers, to Manager Cook's point, we already do have a record of votes. Right now, it's a spreadsheet with hyperlinks to the resolutions as they are signed. It wouldn't take much additional just to have, as Manager Cook suggested, a folder right on either the governance page or the board manager's page with all of the signed resolutions in it. So personally, I don't see any great issue with this.
Yes.
I'm
So-
finished. Thank you.
Manager Crafton.
I guess I wanted to ask our administrators, so if there's an issue that comes up, how do you go back and find what it is? Because I've never known that to be a problem. You've always been really efficient in finding things, so.
President Pedersen, managers, with the help of Mr. Monahan and Ms. Bockham, we have a database now. So there is a spreadsheet, which, they're all labeled as, I think, in here, somewhere within this document, Manager Cook points out how they should be, the nomenclature of the documents, and that's what the nomenclature is. So we know the date, we know the year that it was done, and we know the sequence in which it was done. If we need to know specifically, if we forget what it is, we can go to the agenda, find it, and bring it out. So we're able to retrieve resolutions rather expeditiously.
So there's already something in place, is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
There is. And so I believe what Manager Cook is asking for is for that repository to be somewhere where everyone can have access to it. If they have questions about when did the board pass this resolution, they can go onto our website and find that resolution. Right now, they can find it through the actual board packet if they wanted to, but it'd be easier to just have one central repository, and I don't see an issue with doing that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Smith, would you like to continue?
Managers, the next substantive issues arise under the section Roman numeral 5, Manager's Authority. The first issue is the board president is authorized to speak on behalf of the district. Manager Cook would suggest a change that no manager may speak on behalf of the district unless authorized to do so by the board.
And Madam President,
Yes, Manager Cook.
if I could just address this, the reason I did this is because I think it's very important that we as the board decide what our positions are going to be and what's going to be conveyed. Now, by this, I don't mean to say that, like there's I think it's in the code of conduct provision or whatever it is, not that you can't have, discussions and say, well, I think this way or I feel that way, but speaking on an authoritative basis, I don't think anybody should be doing that, but maybe what to be added would be is something to the effect that, the president does have the authority to reiterate, actions taken by the board. I think that's a given, but so I didn't want, I think there was prior to all of our being on this board, other than maybe Manager Kraft, and I think there was a tendency of some former presidents to, at least in my view, kind of take the position they got to speak for the board, which, I took issue with. So I want to make sure that some new president, doesn't go around doing that, and that this basically being a signal, be careful what you say, make sure that we've approved it, repeating something we've done or approved, et cetera, that's fine. But I'm very leery based upon past experience about just saying the president can speak for it. And I think it would be implied to me that if we adopted a resolution and decided to do something, that clearly the president would have the authority to go repeat what we did. I just don't want to leave the impression that, the president has some, I don't even know what the right adjectives, authority to go speak and possibly bind the board. So that's my purpose. Not that the president can't speak about what we've approved, just, just to make that clear.
Manager Duval, did you have a comment?
No, I'm just
Okay,
curious. Well, I guess I do have a comment.
yes.
I'm trying to understand what the president would make that would be a statement to whomever, wherever that would be, that didn't have the backing of the board. I mean, that power isn't there, is it now?
President Pedersen, Manager Devel, if I may speak to that, some instances do arise. For instance, there have been times where we've needed to meet with city administrators or city managers, and having the president be able to speak with some candor is helpful in that respect. I take Manager Cook's position not lightly. I do. I worked for a city when what he was talking about was going on, and there should be a distinction between the president committing the board to something versus the president being able to act on behalf of the board in carrying a message to the other managers. How one makes that distinction, I don't know. I'll leave that to smarter minds than myself, but yeah.
You had a comment, Manager.
So when I was president, wasn't that long ago, I can still remember, there would be questions from like the county and potentially the city. And, it was always clear to me that, a major financial decision or even a minor financial decision goes through the process. It's not something that I would decide, oh, we're going to spend 40 million. No, yeah, no problem. I can't imagine somebody doing that, but that probably there are people who have done it. But it seems logical to have some further description on what the president should be able to commit.
Okay. So do you as a governance committee feel that you need to maybe look at this just one more time and make a
I
couple of
think Lewis
changes?
can help us through it.
Yes.
Take a relook.
Comment?
Manager Crafton.
Thank you. I think this as written has served us well. We need somebody designated to speak to us, and as the person that assumes the presidency, I mean, they're not going to go out on their own. They're just going to represent what we already have decided as a board. So, I mean, we've had this, like when we did the celebration of the bridge or whatever. It's just nice to have one person that's designated, and the president seems to be the most
Logical. person.
logical. Yeah, it made sense. But this has served us well. We're just aware that there's a designated person that speaks for us.
Well, how about if the
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
how about if the committee takes a look at just maybe at wording that a little bit more specifically so that you aren't really giving the president the yahoo to do whatever they you would
They
like.
can't vote for all the managers in a meeting with some stakeholder or
Yeah,
other government entity and commit to something that is clearly already stated as a function of the board.
right. All right, I think that sort of takes into account everyone's comments.
I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
The next substantive issue is still in this section concerning managers' request for information. Manager Cook proposes that the restrictions on 15 minutes of the administrator's time and cumulative 30 minutes be deleted and a language inserted about timely access to all information upon request, subject to applicable laws. Manager should endeavor to limit his or her request information so as to not unreasonably interfere with the administrator's other duties. And nothing contained herein shall restrict a manager's rights under any applicable law. The distinction here, any citizen has a right to request, any person has a right to request information for the district under the Data Practices Act, and the district is obligated to make it available pursuant to the terms of the Data Practices Act. Question here is what, by virtue of being a manager, what access to information rights do you have? concerning use of the administrator or staff time. And so this puts a parameter on that, but it does not restrict a manager's right to request any information generally. So that's the distinction. But perhaps Manager Cook would like to speak to it.
Yeah, Madam President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
Well, so to the thing, let me, this has some history. This has not always been in the manual to my understanding. And in fact, I believe somebody inserted it because I was asking some questions. I think it sums it up by those of you who were at the meeting at the Arboretum with at least the one gentleman that was from Bowser that was the prior administrator. And I think another person from Bowser was there. And if my recollection serves me correctly, the person from Bowser who was the previous administrator, I brought this up, and I guess my characterization that he was somewhat I guess he was surprised that there'd be any type of limitation, and he went into some examples where he had long conversations. That his view was it was important, in his view at least, it was important for the managers who were responsible to make the decisions to have the information they thought was important for them to make their decisions. And I happen to be agree with him, and so I guess people asking questions and people having to answer them may have different opinions on this issue, but I take my oath very seriously. I'm sure you all do. And that oath specifically says I have to do it to the best of my ability. Well, I can't do it to the best of my ability if I don't have what I believe is the pertinent information. And that's why I propose this as a reasonable compromise, because some arbitrary objective time limit, to me, is an artificial impediment to me having the information I believe is necessary to make a decision. Now, everybody has a difference of an opinion as to how much information they would, they want or care about, or, depending upon their education, experience, just how they care about things. So I'm not interested in abusing time, but I also go back to the point that it is we, the managers, who are the ones given the responsibility to administer, this watershed in accordance with the laws. And I think, as we'll see over the next few months, it is no excuse to having delegated or assume somebody else is going to do something, and you're going to be responsible for what they do. And so I think it's important we try to reach that balance, but I don't think the balance is setting some artificial amount of time or per month. And I think it needs to be worked through. And I think especially somebody's new in it, they need to know more information maybe than if they've been around the block a few times. So I propose this language as opposed to those specific deadlines as a compromise to make everybody aware, needs to be reasonable. So we allow staff to do their job. On the other hand, we have to do our job, and everybody views their job differently. And it should not be a one size fits all. So that is the reason for my proposed change.
Thank you, Manager Cook. Any comments?
I have a comment, Madam
Yes.
President. I believe that this is really more about monopolizing the staff's time. I believe the information is all already available on the website in most cases. And if it's going to be made available to one manager, it should be made available to all managers. And if it requires a workshop to explain it to people, then we should probably have the workshop. But I don't believe that I've ever been lacking information for making a decision. It's there, I go and look at it, and I make the decision and move on.
Thank you, Manager Ziegler. Any other comments?
I would agree with Manager Ziegler's comments. It seems like an appropriate process, and again, it's reflective of everybody's role. And so the information is rolled up in the reports and the documents, and you can read it if you want, you can skim it, you can not read it at all, and still do whatever you want to do. So beyond that, again, it gets at, in my mind, a broad definition of what the role of staff and consultants are versus the role of the board. I think there's at least from my perspective, there's been more than enough information given to us through the access we have and the packets. So I'm in agreement with what you're saying, Manager Ziegler.
Manager Crafton.
I would concur with everything that's been said. And in light of that, I think that what's in here is very reasonable. So that doesn't abridge somebody's rights to that, but I think we get everything we need. And if we don't, we ask. And something is brought up again or reviewed again. So
When I looked at this, my first thought was if each of us gave the district administrator 30 minutes more work, that's adding up to a substantial amount of work. And I just don't think that we're at a lack of getting information. So I concur with the remainder of you here. And I think this should not be changed.
Madam President, I need to respond to these comments.
Could you please hold your comments to a couple of minutes, Manager Cook? We're trying to get through 35 pages tonight, please.
Well, you've just made the point that I made before, are these artificial deadlines is not amenable to making informed decisions. Okay, and you can do it the way you want to. In fact, I suggest that if you don't want to be around when gathering information, everybody is free to leave, to be honest with you. And I'm sorry I'm getting a little irritated about this, but the real point is that if everybody even took 30 minutes, it's still only 150, that's only 2 hours, okay? And a little over 2 hours out of a month, okay? Which, as Administrator Jeffrey has said, I'm here 24/7, 365, and he said that. So I don't consider that, getting information, to be an unreasonable burden. And I think it would be better to be able to get some of that information outside of the meeting, if that would also help, eliminate some of the time spent during the meetings. And I really don't understand. I mean, you can do it as, you can have your own positions, but I don't understand why you don't want to get the information. Maybe you have no need for it, but those of us have a need for that information. And, and I'll be honest, if Administrator Jeffrey had been around for 20 years, I would certainly have, a different view. If all of our staff had been here for 20 years, it certainly would be, a different matrix. And if I'd been here for 20 years, it would be a different matrix. But the point is, all of us, all the staff, I think, what is it, 6 years, 8 years, something like that? And I don't know, I've been around a lot of good businesses, and I don't think you become an expert or know everything in 6 or 8 years. So I think it's a mistake, and I will again repeat the fact, even the manager who was at Bowser, I think he's retired now, was of my opinion. So I'll yield.
Thank you. I think we can proceed.
Managers, with that, I think we are done with that general policies section. There are some changes that have to do with financial information that we'll just come back to. So we move to the bylaws. And first part of the bylaws gets to the duties of the officers. And under the secretary's duties, Manager Cook has offered additional language having to do with notices of meetings that the secretary with the assistant administrator can issue required public and board notice of all meetings in accordance with the open meeting law and other applicable laws. Manager Cook suggests adding a reference to 103D 315 subdivision 10. But as of today, that's been amended. So that provision doesn't read the same way anymore. The next section, still under secretary's duties. There's an additional, I'm not sure how substantive it is, but the idea is to maintain a physical or electronic file for each meeting consists with the notice of the meeting, the agenda, and the materials provided. I think that's the intention of what we currently do. So maybe it's a matter of wording. And that also there's the idea of each committee of the district with assistant administrator to have an audio or video recording to be posted to the website. I don't think it's current practice for all the committees to be recorded. So that's a question within the board's purview. You could certainly require that they be, but you're not required to. Maybe that's a place to pause and discuss.
Yes, Manager Ziegler.
So you read my mind.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that we've had some discussion already with the CAC, and they don't feel like their meetings need to be recorded, except for the presentations that present information from staff or outside experts. And that makes sense to me. I have no problem with recording the official board meetings, but I think recording the workshops is probably not necessary. But the question to me is, do you need to have it in the bylaws, or are we already doing it? And how long do you save them for? And you start to worry about people who are speaking to the recording rather than the efficient use of our time and making decisions. So I have some concerns about requiring all our meetings be recorded or videotaped.
Manager Crafton.
Yeah, so, and the other point is we have minutes from our meetings, so
Ah.
I think it's covered. I agree with everything that Manager
Yeah.
Ziegler said.
I feel like if the minutes are reflective of what's in the meeting, I don't really see a need to do that. That's my stance.
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Madam President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
Well, at least, I don't remember if you said it, but, Manager Crafton stating, the minutes, reflect what happened on the meeting. I know of at least 2 instances where we did record meetings, then the minutes do not reflect what happened at the meeting. One in particular has to do with Manager Crafton, which she said, in relation to a discussion about me, we'll let them talk, we'll just ignore them and then go boom. That was never in any of the minutes. Okay. And I know I can find other examples. One, in fact, was minutes, and I raised this minutes of our meeting, which I raised about the minutes where the person writing the minutes, took it upon themselves to I guess, insert their own characterization of what people said or how they said it on that basis. And I brought this up. That's totally inappropriate, to do that. That it's not it's not the job of the recorder or the secretary to insert, their view or of characterization of comments. So I think I've just given you 2 pretty powerful reasons why we should, in fact, be recording, these minutes. In fact, I can't remember right now the exact, but there was at least one occasion where there was a similar comment by Administrator Jeffrey in a meeting that happened to be recorded. And so based on those, I'm sorry, I don't trust what goes on at these meetings, and it's impractical to attend them if you're going to, at least for those of us who are still working, to attend these meetings if they're going to be held during the day. If they were held in the evening, you know, certainly it's up to me if I want to show up, but I would prefer not to, simply because of COVID and in my condition. So that's why I inserted that, because based upon you know, facts of situations where the minutes did not accurately reflect what was said. And I'm very concerned about exactly what is said during these meetings. And I'm always suspicious of anybody who isn't willing to have what they say recorded, especially in a public forum. It's public information. The public is entitled to know. You know, these old rules about having minutes were back when there were no recording devices, et cetera. And I think it's inexpensive. Storage is cheap. There is no technological reason not to have recordings. And I think it's in the interest of the public to be able to have certainly the opportunity to be able to go and listen to a discussion of topics that were held. And I don't believe that minutes in and of themselves are sufficient, especially given, you know, the examples that I've said where, you know, the minutes I think are lacking, or not. I don't think they're lacking. I know that they're lacking. So I posit that we should include the provision that these meetings, including committees, you know, be recorded, whether it's, you know, audio or video. What the CAC does is up to them. I mean, they're an independent group as I read it under the statutes. They can conduct their meetings any way they want. Although, you know, we certainly have the ability to say, well, you know, if you guys don't want to have recordings, maybe we don't have the right people on that board. Why are you concerned about the public knowing what you're talking about? I have concerns about what people are talking about. I don't understand why people would not want this to be recorded when they're actually serving the public. Wouldn't they want to have the public know what they're doing, what they're thinking on behalf of the public? So with that, again, I you know, I recommend that we include or require to have audio and video for the reasons that I stated, and I yield back.
President Pedersen.
Yes.
So I'd like to add a little context for that, and that is the fact that we have had 4-1 votes on one of these things numerous times, and that was the context in what I was trying to say was that.
Thank you, Manager Crafton. So I believe that all four of us here have had a say. Manager Cook has had a say. I believe you can surmise what our comment would be there, Mr. Smith. So can we keep going?
If you turn the page, there's a series of suggested changes from Manager Cook that all relate to financial matters that I suggest we skip for tonight.
Okay.
And then you get to a section about committees. And Manager Cook has suggested adding language at the end of that paragraph. The last sentence of the existing language reads that a complete and accurate copy of committee votes and written reports will be made by the secretary and filed and recorded in the records of the district and shall be presented to the board at a subsequent board meeting.
We do this.
Cook, and then adds additional language. The committee shall follow Robert's Rules of Order. Any committee member can call a meeting of the committee with 7 days notice. Committees comply with all the applicable laws to notices of the meeting. And all committee meetings be noticed and open to the public as required by the open meeting law, except those which are required to be closed or which may be closed. And an audio recording made of a closed meeting and maintained according to the district's retention policy. So the main policy questions there have to do with the functioning of committees, noticing, and any committee member being able to call a committee meeting.
President Pedersen, managers, if I can add one thing, Mr. Smith kind of skipped over the very first change at the next regular monthly meeting, and that is not always possible.
Mhm.
There are times where the Audit and Finance or Governance Committee might meet the day of or the day before the meeting, and it's simply not a doable
Mhm.
timeline.
So perhaps that should be a subsequent if we end up keeping that portion of it. Yes. I guess I don't really see how, Mr. Smith, how different this is than what we already do. Am I wrong about this? I mean, that's what I'm seeing that we're doing anyway.
Mhm.
I think the main question would be, I think your committees typically follow Robert's Rules of Order.
Right.
Having any member of a committee call a committee meeting, we have small committees with 2 managers, so I guess typically you work that out through cooperation and
Right.
work with the administrator.
Madam President, if Mr. Smith is done.
I'm done.
Yes, Manager Cook.
You know, I'm sorry, but I keep hearing this. Well, this is what we do. That may be fine, but we're going to state this is what we do. Again, it's the Mack truck, you know, issue, so that there is guidance for anybody who steps into these, you know, positions going forward. To say, well, that's what we do is not the answer to why you have procedures and manuals written down. And I don't know enough about the internal operations, but I know most of the companies that I'm aware of and that I've worked with, you know, for 40 some years, you know, they have policies and procedures. They might not all be wrapped up in one, you know, governance manual. That's just kind of the methodology that we use. But I think it's important to spell out this is how we do it so that, you know, new people, you know, a number of us, you know, could leave, etc. So I don't put any, I guess, substance to saying, well, that's how we do it. Well, the point is we're saying, yes, this is how we do it, and this is how we're going to do it until we decide to change the rules. So I yield.
Any other comments?
No.
No. No. No. I think you again can surmise how we sit with that. So I think we can proceed.
Managers, the next substantive issue that I see concerns section on meetings in the bylaws. There is a reference again to 103D 315 subdivision 10, which has been amended. The next section is about video access and recording and location of meetings, including committee meetings. It says that all meetings shall be made available for simultaneous viewing and participation by the public via video technology such as Zoom. And so the question is, do you want to have all committee meetings? I think you function that way. And just, if that's the case, I take Manager Cook's comment. It's fine to say so here. But that's new language, so I'm just flagging it for you.
Any comment?
So I have a comment,
Yes, Manager Ziegler.
if I may. So I think that having subcommittee meetings or committee meetings on Zoom is convenient sometimes. But I don't think that it's required that we make all committee meetings available to the public on Zoom. I kind of think that, you know, if they want to attend, they can attend. But, you know, we're not we're trying to put together something at the committee that can be reviewed and approved by the full board. So the committees, you know, it's kind of like a committee on the state government level where, you know, they have these committees, but not everybody on the Senate or the, is there. So, it has to be presented when it's fully put together and before it's decided to make it a law or to pass the amendment or whatever they're doing. So I don't think that we need to make it available on video, live, Zoom, for public. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Madam President, I would
Yes.
agree with that fully. Again, it's adding to the staff requirements to have the facility set up, and it disrupts the flow of work that goes on here. If you've ever walked in here in the midday, this is a big workroom. And the meetings we have set up, and it requires additional support to make the meetings work the way they do now. And so there's a level of efficiency of, if we have two-person board meetings, two-person committee meetings, that we do it in the most expeditious way and it fits the schedules. And if something doesn't work right, we make a change in the schedule. Anyway, I'm in agreement with basically what Manager Ziegler is saying.
Thank you. Manager Crafton.
Yes, and the other thing is that whatever we do in our committees is a recommendation, usually, to the board. So everything's going to come back to the board anyway. Nothing, it's not like you're making some kind of policy that's not reviewed by the board.
Yeah, I also concur. I just think everything we do ends up coming back to the board anyway. So why,
Right.
it's extra work for the staff. And so I believe we have a 4-person agreement here.
Well, Madam President,
Yes, Manager Cook.
I think I should have the opportunity to comment.
Certainly.
I'm in favor of, complete transparency, and for the reason I stated before about what has been said at meetings that don't get reflected in minutes, I think is important for people, if they want to know what goes on, because that would inform their decisions on how they might respond to the board and or their elected, officials on that basis. If we have the right equipment, which is inexpensive, I know that you can conduct Zoom meetings via laptops. All you have to do is control the audio, which is pretty simple by having, one audio. So talking about efficiencies or times, I think is a red herring. And at least it's a red herring until we actually get the, an advice of a bona fide, IT person. Hopefully somebody other than whoever advised us regarding, our current audio video, setup. So again, I'm all in favor of transparency, especially for the reasons that I previously stated regarding at least 2 meetings. So that's, I'll yield on that basis.
Thank you. I believe again, we can proceed forward.
Managers, the next substantive issue that I see concerns the setting of the agenda. Manager Cook has offered language that items for inclusion on the tentative agenda, if they're sent 3 business days preceding the date of the meeting, those items are to be included in the proposed agenda. And the current policy is for the board president and the administrator to receive any suggested items for the agenda and then have discretion to set a proposed agenda. Maybe including items that have been suggested and maybe not. So that's the policy question.
Madam President?
Yes.
So I have a concern with the, we need everything in the board packet. So many of the agenda items that might be requested by a manager that haven't been reviewed already by staff likely require some addition to the board packet. And, we'd like to see the board packet more than 3 days ahead of the meeting. So I think it needs to be within staff's and the president's purview to decide whether or not to include something that's been brought up more recently.
Mhm. Thank you. Any other comments?
Madam President.
Yes, Manager Cook.
Well, again, I think we're talking a little bit about a red herring here, because I cite within this year number of times where items are on the agenda, the documentation isn't prepared. We don't even receive it until maybe at best 2 days before, sometimes just the day before. So, about getting the information, somehow in a timely manner, it's just simply a red herring unless we're actually going to enforce it on all items on our agenda, which I don't actually object to. I mean, in my view, we could say, if we don't have the information and the presentations on the day we set the agenda, so we can post the agenda and post the materials that same day, I'm sorry, it gets carried over. And unless we otherwise vote that it's an emergency and we have to deal with it. So again, I think a red herring argument. I just propose this. I'm flexible to what it is, but we need to have some process so that we have some idea what's going to be on the agenda, so we can know if it's not on there, can we put it, can it be put on, or should it be addressed? And then the question is, well, what's the requirement for having something on the agenda? Like I said, are there documents, are there presentations, et cetera, that should be put on the agenda? So I would ask that, Administrator Jeffrey and you, Madam President, consider this so that we have a robust means of getting items, timely on the agenda with timely submission of materials, so there's adequate time to review them. And quite frankly, given the weekend and we normally have Wednesdays for the regular meetings, that's not a lot of time in and of itself. So we had previously talked about the possibility, instead of the first, Wednesday, do we make it some other day so that, there's adequate time to get the agenda out, the notice out, and, et cetera. And I think we had this discussion when Mr. Ward was the president, but as it is now, I have no idea what's going to be on there, what's going to be missed, or, sometimes people mention something and then, you're kind of left hanging out there because you don't have time to prepare or respond. So I don't know if Administrator Jeffrey has any suggestions that would be allow for inclusion, but also be efficient.
President Pedersen.
Yes.
Managers, there are different types of submittals. So allowing, for instance, permit. If we take a permit 3 days prior, there is no way the engineer can review it, legal can review it, and get it into the packet. But so, if you want to set 2 different lanes, the managers may put something, 3 days prior, and everybody else needs to make it 10 days prior. I mean, something like that might be workable, but just a blanket 10-day or blanket 3 days is going to make Mr. Welch's and Mr. Sobiek's life not pleasant.
Manager Kraft.
Yeah, so sometimes it's a timing issue. We only meet once a month. And then we have to make decisions. And so sometimes the information is still coming in. We know what's going to be brought up because it's already on the proposed agenda. And then we get the explanations when we get to the meeting. They walk it through us. I don't remember a time where we've ever been asked to vote on something that we weren't ready or didn't feel informed on, I mean, we just would delay it then at that point. But I think they need the flexibility to make sure we've got the most current information at the time that we have our meeting.
Mhm.
And that's available to us and they'll walk us through it. So I think the logistics need to be flexible enough to accommodate the people that are bringing us the important information.
So my comment on this would be lots of times the agendas can be incredibly long if there's a lot that needs to go through them. So sometimes you need the flexibility of saying, this isn't really necessary for us to be able to look at next week. Let's put this off for a little bit, or something might come up where we have to address it. So there needs to be some caliber of flexibility when you're putting such a thing together. And it's always going to be this way where you're not always going to have all the documentation you need, and maybe it comes at the last minute and you've got to take a look online before you come to the meeting. That's just the way that this line of business works. It's what we do. It's how we do it. That's my comment.
Well, Madam President,
Yes, Manager Cook.
but in response to all due respect, I mean, if we set out the deadlines, and there are no reasonable excuses in my mind, absent, a hurricane or something that we have to deal with. There is no excuse for not having the information. If you don't have the information and haven't provided it, you got to go to the next meeting. Or we always have the ability to call a special meeting. Or we could have 2 meetings scheduled every month if we wanted to, which we had. I think we actually started out that way, and then we converted basically meeting workshop, and now we've eliminated half of the workshops. My point is that we should be setting deadlines for getting items on the agenda. And if you want your item on the agenda, if we set the schedule right, you have to have your materials. If you want to submit materials, or if they're required, you have to have it in there by the deadline, which I would say would be certainly not later than the date that we post the agenda, which is typically the Friday afternoon before the regular meeting. On that basis. And we're government entity. We don't have to go jump through unnecessary hoops. If we tell people, here are the deadlines, we already do, right? On the calendar, correct me if I'm wrong, Administrator Jeff, we already have on the calendar, hey, you want to submit your permit, here's the deadline. And why not put on the calendar? If you want to bring an item to the board, here's your deadline to submit your request. And then the president, and I assume you, Administrator Jeffrey, and whoever else, you'll have that stuff. And, when you come to that Friday before, if that's when you do it, say, okay, here's the agenda. We've got it filled out. And maybe it's a little bit more, but somebody calls the day before and said, I'm sorry, you've requested this, but we don't have your information, so it won't be on the agenda. That would just be a courtesy. You wouldn't have to do that, but it seems to me that would be a courtesy. I just think that, I know all the corporates that I work with, unless it's an emergency, you have the meeting, when the meeting is, everybody sets, here's the deadline, if you want to get it on there. And if you want an exception, you got to go beg, borrow, and steal from, the president, or if it's a board meeting, the chairman or whatever it is. And we can always make exceptions. But I think my point here is it's to set basically a general standard. So everybody knows, okay, if you want to do something, here's your timelines. We can always make an exception. But why should we constantly be making exceptions and let people take, advantage of us, especially when we do have the ability to have special meetings? And again, the purpose of this is so we have an information adequate amount of time to make an informed decision to the best of our ability, which is our oath. I yield.
Thank you. I believe that you've heard our opinions, Mr. Smith.
Yes, I understand.
Okay, good. Let's proceed forward. We're still working our way on page 15 here.
Okay, the next page has a suggestion from Andrew Cook that every member wishing to be heard on any matter shall be entitled to be heard at least once and at least as many times and for as long as any other member. within Robert's rules, a basic recognition of each member of the governing body having a right to be recognized and to be heard. And then there are time limits that Robert's rules imposes in terms of keeping track of time of once time limits are recognized and imposed, then they need to be applied consistently. And so I think that one is also well taken. So it's, I don't know that, I think Robert's rules covers this, but
Right.
it's up to the board.
Madam President, I just want to interject in light of Mr. Smith's comment here, because I think it'd be helpful. Okay, proceed.
Yes, you may.
My point was to get something in here to, it maybe it's sufficient to summarize Robert's rules. I mean, I have no problems with Robert's rules because they have a process, initial speaker responses, and then usually the person who starts it, has the last say, going about that. I don't have any problem with that. It just seemed to me we needed to, or we should have the mechanism and the process, set forth, not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of, of the public, and something we can point to say, we understand, here's our process, et cetera. So whether it's my language or a reference to this, more of the specifics or a summary of the applicable Robert's Rules of Order, I really don't care. My whole point is to make it a point that everybody knows that there's a process and we have, equal access and time on items.
Madam President?
Yes.
Manager Cook, you yield back.
I yield. Yes, thank you.
Madam President, I disagree with the wording. I think as many times as somebody else, somebody's going to have to speak last. So I think, each manager should have the right to speak on each thing and then have a right to a rebuttal at the end. But if another manager spoke something else and needs to have a rebuttal, and then the original person has to have a rebuttal to that, that just makes the meeting untenably long.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one time
Rebuttal.
speaking and one rebuttal.
Yes.
And I like what we've done, or what you've done with the 5 minutes and 1 minute. So the rebuttal shouldn't be a complete recital of the original discussion.
Comments. Right,
Comments.
Right.
So I think that there needs to be some work on the wording there, but I don't have a basic disagreement with the underlying, every manager should have a right to speak on each topic, and they should have a right to a rebuttal. But I think beyond that, we don't want a back and forth debate.
Right.
I yield.
Any other comments?
Nope.
I would agree with Manager Ziegler. That would be my feeling about it. So can we proceed forward? Yes.
The last section of the bylaws concerns compliance, suspension, and amendment. And here Manager Cook has suggested adding language that would extend the amount of time in which you could enter an objection. So the sentence reads, currently informal compliance and substantial performance will be sufficient under the foregoing provisions in the absence of an objection seasonably taken. Manager Cook would delete seasonably taken and add is made not later than the close of business of the meeting of the managers held immediately after the meeting of the managers, at which I believe the minutes of the meeting to which the objection pertains are read. So it would extend your right to object to not following the bylaws to the next meeting whenever the minutes of that meeting are read. And then it would also expand that procedure, that objection procedure, to not only the bylaws, but any part of the governance manual.
Any?
Madam President?
Yes, Manager
So
Ziegler.
my concern is that carries your disagreement beyond the vote into the next meeting, potentially a month later. So you could have something that goes on for months discussing the same thing. If there's an objection after the meeting's over, you could end up with a really long discussion on
The same topic.
same
right,
thing over.
Right, right,
over and over.
right. Any other comments?
Madam President,
Yes, Manager Cook.
I just want to, put a little, context around this. I don't know what seasonably means. So I was just trying to come up with something more objective, to, and I just came up with, it seemed made sense. Okay, well, we get the minutes of the next, meeting, and that's the point where you can make your objection. But I just didn't know what seasonably meant. And so I think somebody else had made a comment, and I think it was Administrator Jeffrey on a totally different provision. He asked one of the comments, like, what does that mean? And I forget what the exact context was, because it was one of those subjective, wishy-washy things. So my whole goal here was to come with something objective, and I just thought, well, it's easy. We get the minutes, we know what it is, and we get the next meeting. If it's something else, I don't know, but seasonably doesn't mean a darn thing to me. So I yield.
Does that answer your question?
Madam President, managers, I think we could address the concern by defining seasonably more precisely.
Right.
It typically would be understood to be within the same meeting at least.
Right.
And then the question is whether you want to extend that objection procedure to not only the bylaws, which is the way it currently reads, but extend it to all other provisions of the manual.
Sure what that means.
Could you explain that a little bit further for us?
Um,
Give us an example.
Well, you have other parts of your policies concerning, for example, the code of conduct. You have, there are other policies that are not likely to be governing how you operate in a meeting necessarily. So I'm not quite sure how it would extend, but typically these procedural objections would be confined to the bylaws and not the rest of the governance manual. And Manager Cook may have some rationale or explanation.
Manager
Well,
Cook.
Yes. Again, I'm not sure the way that we've crafted this governance manual. I'm not sure that with respect to timing and issues, that it's just, those are limited to the bylaws. So I don't see any reason why, if there's a failure under any part of the other ones that we can't, and we're operating under, that we can't object. I can actually give you an example. In my view, the board, without authorization under the law, assume that it would take a position to deny me access to certain information. Okay, on that basis. That was part data practices. That's part of, I forget which other section that was. But there's just an example. So I'm not sure everything is covered by the bylaws. I'd be happy to take some more time and look to see if there are other provisions, but rather than spend a lot of time worrying about something that might not apply, I figured, well, if it's in the governance manual, it should be important enough to cover under this provision. So that's my view.
Mr. Smith.
I think the way this kind of provision typically operates, the bylaws are intended to be the rules by which you transact your business especially at your meetings and otherwise your basic organization. So I think most bodies would confine an objection to departing from the bylaws to the bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
There would be other devices for expressing concerns at meetings about not complying with other provisions of the manual. So I think you would be, the concern is adequately addressed without this additional sentence, but
Okay.
that's just my view.
So I would concur.
Yes.
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 Yes. So 4 of us concur. Next section.
The next, that takes us to the code of conduct. And I believe that the first few pages are just reflect formatting changes, but not substantive changes.
Okay.
And I think the first substantive change occurs under a heading of manager's fiduciary duty, use or disclosure of information. Did I miss something?
Yes, Madam President.
Struck all of 2B.
Yes, Manager Cook.
Yeah, Administrator Jeffrey was referring to item 2B. That I had stricken.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
That's
So the proposed language that would be stricken is board members shall not express concerns about the performance of a district employee in public to the employee directly or to employee supervisor. Comments about staff performance shall be made solely to the administrator through private correspondence or conversation or through performance evaluations, which may be held in closed session. I guess I would pretty strongly recommend against deleting that language, but it's a matter for the board.
I would concur very strongly. I think really if there's an issue with an employee, it's not really to be broadcast and it should be really handled somewhat confidentially. And the district administrator being in charge of the staff here, I concur with this. It's got to stay, I think.
I agree.
Thank you.
I guess my only objection would be sometimes I don't want to praise them. I mean, is that a problem? If I've seen them here and they've done something I think is super,
Thank
Well,
you, Manager.
we're just talking derogatory, then I totally agree with it.
And Manager Duval, you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
Totally.
Yes.
Well, Madam President, I'm
Yes.
not, yeah, if I can proceed.
Yes.
Uh,
Go ahead.
The problem, yes, well, please just give me a minute. Thank you. The problem here is that, so what happens if, I mean, I have no problem if going first to, the employee or to the administrator or whoever the staff person is, but what happens afterwards? And this is a mandate in this. That's one of the issues I have with some language that was added is adding mandates instead of saying, you should not or you should refrain from, which is the general language that was included when this code of conduct, was adopted. But secondly, quite frankly, unless you're violating some provision of the Data Practices Act, which governs privacy, there is no teeth behind this. In fact, there's a statute to the contrary, which says, you can discuss these items or most items in public at a meeting without liability. There's some limitations having to do with certain things. So I object to being able to say you can never do that. I don't think is accurate. And I think if anything, it should be read to the effect that, board members, should refrain from and certainly should not state anything that would violate, any applicable law. And I think you'd actually be in better stead if you were trying to argue that somehow this had some binding effect, which I don't believe it does. And telling a board member shall not do this, I don't think is within the power of the board in the first place.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Smith, I think you've heard our opinions.
Then the next item that I was referring to was manager's fiduciary duty, use or disclosure of information. The language recommended by the committee reads, a board member shall not use or disclose any information gained in the course of or by reason of his or her official position in any way that violates his or her fiduciary duty to the district or the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. And I guess Manager Cook is proposing to delete language that refers to fiduciary duty and just refer to applicable law. So I'm not sure if this is a substantive issue or not, but I wanted to flag it for you. Maybe give Manager Cook an opportunity to speak to it.
Manager Cook.
Yes, thank you. Well, again, the purpose of this was in large part exactly what Mr. Smith said. The problem is that I'm not sure the degree to which there are fiduciary duties. But there are laws, and to the extent that the disclosure would violate the law, seems to me covers it more explicitly and clearly than referring to the somewhat nebulous concept of fiduciary duty, at least as how it applies to government, with the general rule, at least under the data practices, is that all information, held by the district, is basically public information, unless a certain exception applies. So I think it would be more accurate and more clear to, instead of referring to the nebulous fiduciary duty policy, simply to say, you're not going to do it if it violates the applicable law. And there's Mr. Smith, we've had this discussion before about, certain information about, individuals and employees, and certain information submitted as confidential by contractors or permit applications, is confidential and therefore protected by the law. I just think it's a better way to describe the legal concept or legal constraints on the board members.
Thank you, Manager Cook. So it seems to me this is more of a legal thing, and maybe I think we need to leave that up to legal source rather than us deciding what the exact correct wording is. So I think we should leave that to you.
President,
Yes.
so there's also the timing issue. I mean, everything is public information at some point, except with regards to staff and so on. But with regards to permits, and I think, there is a time to release it that doesn't harm the applicant. So
So I'm thinking it's more like he's got to determine if it's fiduciary duty or applicable law. It's more that.
Mhm.
Okay, Mr. Smith, next section.
Madam President. Oh, sorry.
Madam President, can I just ask Mr. Smith? I feel I have to make a comment with respect to, paragraph D. So before you go on, if I could have the floor to just comment on that.
Sure.
I can't help but feel that, and also reading the minutes, I think it was the governance committee. I can't help but feel that this addition, which was an addition, was directed at me. I'm okay to keep it in there because it does deal with frivolous, litigation. But I have to make a comment that that's already basically baked into, the law. So I'm not sure that it was necessary, but I find it, I don't know if it's ironic is the right adjective, that this was somehow decided to be added, and on that basis. So that's my comment. I yield back.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Mr. Smith, let's proceed.
Managers, that concludes the code of conduct. The next section concerns policies for access to public documents, the data practices. This might be an appropriate time to quit for the evening.
Okay,
It's not a terribly long section, but given the goal of ending now, there's we could incorporate this into the next round if you.
okay, that sounds good. I'm very thrilled that we are all the way to page 25. Oh,
Madam President,
yes, Manager Cook.
can I just ask, what is the plan for finishing the rest of the provisions, at least of the current manual? So that's question number one. I have a second one, but maybe if somebody could address the first.
Mr. Jeffrey.
President Pedersen, managers, off the cuff, without sitting down with the calendar, my thought is April 29th, there is a joint meeting of the Audit and Finance and Governance Committees. We will go through the financial policies at that time, April 29th. So I would probably like to get that out just to the managers as soon as possible after we're done with that. I am thinking we will have to call a workshop perhaps in June to get back together and go through the rest of the items on this. I would see at the July meeting asking for permission for, I believe we got to do a 30-day comment according to our governance. So July asks for a 30-day comment period, and hopefully August or September adopt.
Right, July's gonna be an issue. I'm gonna be at Isaac Walton National Convention, 14th through the 17th.
So
We usually back up that meeting when, I'm just hoping there won't be a conflict.
well, July will simply be asking the managers for permission to disseminate for,
At your July board meeting.
yes.
Right.
So it wouldn't be decided upon at that time. We would have a quorum still, so.
Okay, all right.
Madam President, if I can.
Yes,
continue.
Manager
One
Cook.
second part of my question slash, comment was, I would like to see the governance committee, consider the governance manual or something like it, where we consolidate in one place all of our policies. And we had this discussion early on, I think, with Administrator Jeffrey, when we started to get into this, about, reviewing and he had to do a lot of digging to find out, well, what manuals on there, what policies do we have, what have we, adopted in the interim. And I think it would be appropriate for that committee, along with Administrator Jeffrey, to talk about what, where can we keep all these in a more, consolidated place so they're easy to find on that basis. I mean, it could be personnel, it can be the financial, et cetera. So I would just ask the committee to consider that as we finish going through this process. And one last time, with respect to the Data Practices Act, I don't claim to be an expert on at least those details, but I'd just like to have Attorney Smith or someone review that closely to make sure we've got the appropriate definitions. I find it very confusing when you talk about non-public, versus confidential versus et cetera, which applies to which, just to make sure anybody can sit down and read and say, okay, I got it. This is private stuff, this is non-public stuff, this is stuff I can get. So that's my last comment. I yield back.
All righty, thank you. And at this time, I think I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
Thank you. So I think we're ready for a vote.
Manager Crafton,
Yes.
Manager Duval,
Yes.
Manager Cook,
Yes.
Manager Ziegler,
Yes.
President Pedersen.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
I think we're talking the 18th.